Good morning. My name is Vertie Sparks. That is spelled Vertie. The last name is Sparks. Sparks is my married name, my name given by my parents when I was born in Utica, Mississippi in 1938 is Vertie May Stamps, Stamps. May is spelled Mae. I was born and spent my early years in a rural community in southern Mississippi, central Mississippi, really. We lived on a farm. My parents had 11 children. I was the fourth from the top of the children. Above me I had two brothers and one sister. We lived on a farm and worked a farm on land that was purchased by my grandfather. My grandfather and grandmother got married, and my father was their oldest child. And my grandfather made a decision that he wanted to live in a community that offered educational opportunities for young Black children. We were called at that time either colored or Negroes. We had a school in that community that was dedicated to educating only Black children. There was a school in the community paid for with public dollars that was only for white children. So in order for us to have an education, we had to have someone come into the community and talk to the residents of the community to see if the people that lived there were interested in having having a school to educate Black children. My grandfather and grandmother moved into that community because it had that school. This school was started by a person who was educated at Tuskegee Institute. Tuskegee was started by Booker T. Washington shortly after the Civil War, and the purpose of the school was to educate young, recently freed people who had been enslaved, and then have them go out into communities throughout the South where there were not schools for Black children, and that was a good percentage of the communities in the South at that time, and to see if there was support in that community to start a school. As you may have guessed, this is a pretty steep undertaking. The school that I attended was started by William Holtzclaw Sr. He came to the community, he met with the people in the community, and it was decided that there was enough support for the school. Most of the Black people in Mississippi, when I was growing up, had very little resources. The resources that they had to do mostly with land and any crops that they could raise on the farm. Despite the low income and the lack of fluid revenue, this community decided that it was important enough for it to make the sacrifice and start this school. The school was supported by Jubilee singers being trained at the school and taken out not only throughout the country, but in some cases they went international, and they went and sang and did performance and raised money as well as the profile of the school. So this is how the school was started. In the process, people had contact with very rich white people that lived outside of the South. There were numerous rich people who provided additional financial support. The school building where I started school and went to school throughout middle school had a physical facility that was built by a man named Rosenwald. Rosenwald was one of the co-owners of Sears Roebuck at that time. And what Rosenwald would do is would provide a set amount of money. And there was also the expectation that the people in the community would also have to come up with a small percentage of the support for the building of these facilities. This is where my older siblings started school. This is where I started school. We would have schools, in most cases, there would be one teacher per classroom. And in some cases, there was more than one grade in a classroom. But despite all of these obstacles, somehow these teachers with very few resources were able to help us provide an educational foundation that many of us went on to build on. And from time to time, I talked to people who grew up in that community, and we marvel at the fact that not only were we able to get a basic educational foundation, but we were also, many of us, able to go on to college and get graduate degrees. And we think that this is a part of the history in this country that has gotten lost. So a small group of us have started to bind together in Utica, where I went to school, to try to preserve a portion of this history, because it's history that I have attempted to teach my children and my grandchildren, but there's so much more that could be transmitted to our children, our grandchildren, and the population as a whole. My parents always had aspirations that we would go to college. My father's name was William Stamps Jr., and I already mentioned the fact that his father had purchased land so that his children and grandchildren would have a place to stay. So that meant that when we were old enough to go to school, that we were able to start school when school opened in September, and we were able to go through until school closed in May, as opposed to our friends, some of them who lived on on property owned by white people. So what that meant, that their first responsibility was to plant the crops and gather the crops. Education was not a priority for these young people. So when school started in September, these people who lived on this land that was owned by someone else were not able to start school because the crops had not been gathered. So that meant they could not start school until after the crops were gathered. Sometimes that would be as late as November. So anything that was taught in the school between the time it started in early September until the crops were gathered, these young people had a gap. They did not get the foundations. Teachers would generally give you a textbook. They would start on page 1 and they would go through that textbook progressively until the end of the school year. Not only were these young children not allowed to start school when school opened in September, they had to stop school in April when it was time to prepare the land for new crops and plant the new crops. So were not able to build that solid foundation to have a platform to build on. My mother's name was, her maiden name was Teresa Frazier. When my mother lived in another community that did not have a school for Black children. So when my mother was in about the fifth or sixth grade, she was sent away to boarding school. She was sent away to the school that now is called Tougaloo College. And there they had schools come from other jurisdictions around the state. And these children were afforded the opportunity of an education. Since they didn't have the financial resources to pay for this education, these children were required to do work to offset some of the cost of their education. In my mother's case, she had the responsibility for setting the tables for the faculty, cleaning up after the faculty eat, and helping with the work in the kitchen. And that way she was able to finish high school, and she had a year of college before she got married. So even my parents, I alluded to the fact that they had 11 children. What that meant is that from an early stage, we had responsibilities. The older children had responsibility for looking after their younger siblings. And as you got older, you were required to go and work in the fields, especially during the summer. But not only during the summer, but during a school day, we would have to get up in the morning and do chores on the farm before walking to school. That it could include feeding the livestock such as cows, pigs, horses, and so forth. But we also had the responsibility for milking the cows. Sometimes we had to separate the mother cow from the calf, so that would be milk left over for the family to use in preparing their meals. And some of us, as we got older, may be required to go in and prepare breakfast for everybody before we left to school. After we finished our chores, we would get dressed and walk to school. After the school day ended, it was not unusual for us to have to return home and do chores around the house. And the chores that you did on any given day would be somewhat dependent upon the time of year. If it was in the fall, you may have to go up and help finish gathering up the crops. During the wintertime, we had to cut wood and make sure that we have wood so that we could start the fire to cook the food and to warm the house. So what your job assignment as a child would just be dependent upon what needed to do and your age. As I indicated, my parents always instilled in us the value of an education. They had the aspiration that we all would go to college. They had, excuse me, they had lots of aspirations, but they had few finances to support those aspirations. My oldest brother, who was the valedictorian of his class, he was the president of his class, he was the quarterback on the football team. He was just an all-around leader. I guess it also helped that this was a very small school we went to. But upon his graduation from high school, a decision was made to send him to Tougaloo College, where where my mother had gone, and he went to Tougaloo College and he did well, but he eventually had to drop out because he didn't have the money to pay the tuition and the cost of the education. Then my brother, second oldest brother, followed a similar pattern. He went to Tougaloo, but again, he had to drop out because of lack of resources. And then my sister, who was 2 years older than I am, also went to Tougaloo, but she had to drop out for lack of money. And I decided when I graduated from high school that I didn't want to go to college, because if we didn't have the resources to support the three older ones, I didn't see any way they were going to have to financially support my educational pursuit. So I decided instead of going to school, I would go directly to work. And I did that I worked as a nurse's aide in the state mental institution. I did all kinds of jobs. I eventually decided to go to Los Angeles, where my brother and sister lived. And I didn't like Los Angeles, so I decided that I was going to return to Mississippi. And in returning to Mississippi, I took a bus, and the bus stopped in Tucson. My second oldest brother was in the military at the time, and he asked me to stop by and visit with he and his wife. And I did, and he persuaded me to stay in Tucson, where I went to work as a waitress for Jack and Laura Banks at Jack's Barbecue. And that's where I met Ed. And Ed and I met at a fraternity brother. Ed was in school at the University of Arizona, and I was working at Jack's. And Ed and I got married, and then he had to move to Texas, to Tyler, Texas, at Texas College to finish up his undergraduate work before going to dental school. Ed's parents were named James Reed Sparks and Evelyn J. Sparks. Reverend Sparks had been born in Terrell, Texas. It's a small town around the Dallas, Texas area. And he stayed there. He got married. He and his wife had 2 children. They had a daughter first, and they had 2 children at that time. And then they had a son whose name was J.R. Reed Jr., James Reed Sparks Jr. And Ed's father made a decision at that time that he was going to move his family from Terrell, Texas to El Centro, California. One of the rationales for making this move, he didn't think that he could necessarily protect his daughter from white sexual predators. So he thought it would be easier if he moved and moved to California. It's my understanding that while he lived in California, he would drive a truck hauling goods back between El Centro and Tucson, Arizona. And for some reason, he took a liking to Tucson, Arizona. And he subsequently moved his family from El Centro to Tucson, Arizona, where Ed was born. When Ed was born in Tucson, His mother delivered him at a facility called the Stork's Nest. And that's where women of color had to go to give birth to their children. It was the last of the children for Mr. and Mrs. Sparks. He always took great pride and had great love for the city of Tucson. He, for some reason, decided at a pretty early age. No, I won't say for some reason. One of Ed's mother's brother was a physician in Hawkins, Texas. And on his father's side, his father had a brother who was a dentist and practiced in Detroit, Michigan. And the uncle that was a dentist came through Tucson and spent some time with his family here and was driving a big car, fancy car. So Ed decided at that point he wanted to go into dentistry. And he even produced a clipping from a paper where his father had been interviewed, and they asked his father about his children. And in that interview, his father said that his youngest son had aspirations to become a dentist. At some point, Mr. Sparks moved his family out on the south side of town, off of Cherry, I believe. And while he was living out there, Del Webbs came to Tucson and decided to do a housing development. And that housing development is still there. That's Weston Hill. And in order for Del Webbs, to build this house, he needed to do something about the Black people that were living in the area where he wanted to do his housing development. So he proceeded to buy up homes of Black people. And he approached Ed's father about purchasing his house. And his father told him he would sell his house to him, but there were conditions. And one of the conditions was that Ed's father owned some land up on First Avenue by the Rito racetrack. And Ed's father told Del Webb that he would have to take the existing house from Cherry and relocate it to his land up on First Avenue. So that an agreement was reached and the house was moved. Now, in moving the house from TUSD jurisdiction, they moved into the Amphi school district. Now, Ed's older brother was already in high school and going to Amphi High School. But they didn't want Amphi School District did not want Ed to attend the middle school. They didn't have any other Black children in that school. So in order to accommodate Ed's education, the Amphi School District decided to provide a chauffeur to pick Ed up from his home on First Avenue and deliver him to school over on Main, where the segregated school was located. So for all of that time until he got to high school, someone would drive to Ed's house, pick him up, take him to school, go back in the afternoon, pick him up and take him back to his home. When TUSD was sued, I think Reuben Salter was the lead attorney in that lawsuit. for maintaining a segregated school system. That information was used in that suit. The fact that they had cooperated with AMFI school district and transferring one student back to a segregated school and TUSD. I have a perspective on that era when Black children were in segregated schools and taught by Black people. I sometimes think that we were better off in terms of educational development, even though some of these schools had inadequate facilities. We were often had hand-me-down books that had been used by white kids. But despite all of that, somehow we were able, many of us were able to get a basic sound educational development that allowed us to go on and pursue other interests post high school. So, excuse me. So I had mentioned the fact that it had transferred to Texas College and to finish his undergraduate work. And Texas College was a very small segregated school in Tyler, Texas. And Ed would often tell me after he finished that school that a lot of the work, a lot of the knowledge that he learned that helped him get through dental school, he learned at Texas College. In a lot of the classes, especially the math and the hard science classes, they had only a few students who were enrolled in these classes. So if you had an interest in learning what was being taught, and you had a teacher that was willing to work with you, that was an excellent opportunity to learn what the teacher and the curriculum had to offer. It was a different perspective than what you get if you attend the University of Arizona and you have a lecture hall with several hundred people in there, and a lot of people are intimidated about asking questions, saying, I didn't understand that point. So if you're in a small classroom setting, then you are more likely to ask questions, even seek the teacher out afterwards to provide clarification. So he has told me more than one time that what he learned in zoology largely came from what he received at that segregated college, Texas College in Tyler, Texas. After a couple of years, he was able to get all of his college credit, and he applied to Howard University dental school. And he was helped and encouraged greatly in that pursuit by Dr. Floyd Thompson, who had gone to Howard a number of years earlier, had gone to Howard earlier. So based on Dr. Thompson's recommendation, it was accepted at Howard University. His first year there, Ed and I had Keith. Robin was not yet born. I spent the first semester in Los Angeles with my brother, working any kind of work that I could get. And then, at the end of the semester, we joined Ed in Washington, D.C. He had, shortly after I got to Washington, D.C., I was able to get a job as a nurse's aide in a what was called a nursing home, then would be called a retirement facility now. But then I learned that I was pregnant and I could no longer, I could not work in that facility anymore. So that meant that Ed had the challenge of going to dental school, and he also would work during the winter break. He would work as at the post office, and then he, again, with the assistance of Dr. Floyd Thompson, Ed was offered a job at the United States Capitol as a Capitol policeman. The reason Dr. Thompson was able to pave the way for Ed to do this was that Morris K. Udall was the representative from Southern Arizona at that time. And Congressman Udall was a patient of Dr. Thompson. So Dr. Thompson again offered out help to Ed by asking Congressman Udall if he would offer Ed one of the patronage job. And Ed was given that job. So he would go to dental school during the day, and he would work at night as a Capitol policeman, and he'd come home, get a couple hours sleep, go to class, and then repeat this whole entire rotation over the following day. Ed was able to successfully complete dental school in 4 years. And at that time, he thought he was interested in being an oral surgeon as opposed to being a general practitioner. He applied for a residency position at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. So we went and lived in Brooklyn, and Ed worked as an intern. And that's where I started decided that I was ready to begin my college education. So I took 2 classes at Brooklyn College. I took a class in sociology, and Ed's advice to me was that I should also take the English class, and that because if, as we were planning, we were returning to Tucson, Arizona, and I decided to finish up my work at the University of Arizona, that Black students entering in the university were routinely placed in a substandard English class. So I took his advice, and I took the 2 classes. I took sociology and English. I would wait till he got home, finished at night and come home, and then I would go to class and took these 2 classes. And I ended up getting a B in both classes. And so at the end of his year, 1 year as an intern, he decided that it probably made more sense for him to return to Tucson and work as a general practitioner as opposed to specializing in oral surgery, which he had an interest in doing. So that's what he did. He returned to Tucson, again with the assistance of Dr. Floyd Thompson. He took the dental board exam and passed, and we all returned to Tucson and lived with his mother for about 6 months or so. Dr. Thompson opened up his office and allowed Ed to come in and practice dentistry until Ed could build up his patient count. And at that time, Ed went out and started on his own in his first solo dental practice. He stayed there, I think maybe 5 years. He had an office on First Avenue, just north of Fort Lowell. And he had his own private practice. He's rented the facility, and he stayed there until he decided to enter into an arrangement with Dr. Whaley, Dr. Joel Turner, and the three of them build a building together, with each of them having their individual separate practice. And that's where he spent I think the next 20 years practicing dentistry there. He loved practicing dentistry. He loved his patients and his interaction with the patient. And I think in a lot of ways that was a perfect profession for him. He had the kind of personality that was engaging and people responded to. He also had a wonderful smile, and he had excellent dexterity. And so, so I think that was a good choice he made. I guess one could question the basis for him making that decision, based on the fact that his uncle, who was a dentist, was driving a fine car, but it all worked out for him. Meanwhile, I decided to start taking classes at the University of Arizona. And by the time that we got back to Tucson, Keith was 6 years old and ready to go into to first grade. And during my experience of looking for a place to stay, I went out, found a real estate agent, and explained to her that I was looking for a place to rent. And I was looking for an apartment or a house that had 3 bedrooms. And she took me around, showed me a few places, and then she suggested that I look at a house in a developing neighborhood, and the neighborhood was located in the AAMSAZ school district. So she took me, she showed me the houses, and I looked at the houses, and they were building 3 bedrooms and 2 bath houses. And because it was a veteran, we were able to get into that house without any down payment. All we needed to do was pay the closing costs. And when when I did the math, it was more cost effective for us to move into a new house that we would have ownership in than to move into a rental where we'd have to pay the first and the last month's rent plus the security deposit. And to this day, I said that was the best investment I've ever made. My children proceeded to start school at Lulu Walker, which was a brand new school. And they had a leader there that had very interesting ideas about how you educate children and what you emphasize and what you don't emphasize. And Keith started there. And then shortly thereafter, Robin started there. And that school, that Lulu Walker School at that time, provided both Keith and Robin with a good sound educational foundation. And now having them in that school was not without its challenge. There were lots of racism and discrimination, but I was in a position where I could go up and advocate on behalf of my children. I also remember what my sociology professor had said to me at Brooklyn College. He actually said it to the entire class, but it stuck with me. He had the belief that the primary reason children do not learn in school has to do with the lack of skills on the part of the teacher. And he said he was comfortable in saying that because he had taught in some schools in the city of New York, in some of the lowest income area in the city. And he said his children performed well and learned well because he didn't accept any excuse for not learning. If he assigned homework and there was a writing involved with it, if they said they didn't have any paper to write on, he said, well, get a paper bag, but do your homework and bring it back to me. And he also said, if you take your child to school and they decide they want to start labeling them, you do not agree with that. So that advice came in quite handy as I was trying to assist Keith and Robin in making the adjustment in the school. And I think that there were some ugly incidents. There was name calling but overall, I believe, and I think Keith and Robin would agree with me, that they got their basic education on how to read and how to do basic math. They did get that foundation while they were at Lulu Walker. But there were incidents. Some days I thought I spent about as much time up there as Keith and Robin did. But again, there was some positive experience, and there were some that were not so positive. So they both finished their elementary school at Lulu Walker. Keith went to the junior high in Amphi. I think he went to Cross Junior High is the name of the school. Robin, by the time that she was ready to go to junior high, she went to Maxwell High School and in TUSD. And Maxwell High School is Maxwell Junior High School, I misspoke, is located out on Anklin Road on the west side of town. Just the interesting side note, the place where Robin went to junior high was named after Morgan Maxwell Sr., who was Ed's principal for when he was attending Dunbar School. And I was not living in Tucson at that time, but a lot of people credit Mr. Maxwell with setting high standards for the school. And he had brought Etta Dawson out here to teach. And Etta Dawson was the one that persuaded him to adopt the motto for the school, be the best. And they had high expectations for school children who attended that school. So it's interesting to me that Ed was in attending Dunbar when Mr. Maxwell was the principal, and Robin ended up going to a school that was named after him. Flashing back to returning to Ed's dental practice, he had success in his practice, and his practice grew, and he was able to devote his full time to practice in dentistry. There came a time when Bruce Babbitt was looking to appoint someone to the Dental Board of Examiners. And he wanted to have more of a representation. So Betsy Bolden somehow decided to recommend Ed for the placement on the dental board. And Bruce Babbitt accepted that recommendation, and Ed was had a good run as a member of the Dental Board of Examiners. As you may guess, the Dental Board of Examiners examined people who were interested in practicing dentistry in the state of Arizona. And Ed did that for a number of years, and then he was elected president of the Dental Board, Arizona Dental Board of Examiners. Also, there came a time when the Western states decided to come together and provide a dental board where an individual could take that board and practice dentistry in any of the states that were represented on that board. Ed also became a member of that and was ultimately elected the president of the Western Regional Board of Examiners. And in addition to that, he was a member of one of the Rotary clubs here in Tucson, and he became the president of that. He also sang in the Arizona Opera as a chorus member. He had a lot of interest in life, and he did a lot of things. Sometimes I wondered, how did he have time to practice dentistry? But after 20 years of dentistry, he decided that he would like to cut back on his private practice, and he applied and was hired in the Arizona State Department of Correction. And he spent 10 years there as a prison dentist. And after 10 years, he'd had enough of that. And then he retired from that. And then he went on to assume a position in the one of the Arizona State facilities for juvenile. And that was where he was working when he became ill. So, and back to my own life, I was able to finish at the University of Arizona in 1975. It suggested that at that time I consider going to law school. I rejected that idea, and I instead went to work. My first job out of the University of Arizona was at the Tucson Skills Center. And the Skills Center was a program that offered job training to individuals who were out of work or wanted to upgrade their skills. So they worked, we provided a number of training opportunities. One was in business and office education. One was a certified nurse's assistant program. We had an auto body repair shop. We had an auto mechanic shop. And we offered different programs and services. And I did that from 75 to December of 1983, where I went to work for Pima County government. I started off in affirmative action. I eventually was responsible for conflict resolution throughout the county government, just for the county employees. And anybody who felt that they had been mistreated because someone didn't know or didn't follow the county rules or policies, or anybody that felt like they'd been discriminated against because of their gender, anybody that felt like they had been subject to discrimination because of their race, because of some kind of disability, they could come to my office and they could seek redress for those perceived mistreatments. So I did that from January of '84 until April of '97, where I went to work for the Tucson Urban League as the vice president for program and services. And I did that up until 2003, and I decided to retire. In terms of my children's educational development, Keith went to Stanford University, got an undergraduate degree, and then got a degree in law from the University of Texas. Robin went to the University of Arizona and got a degree in undergraduate degree. And then she went to law school at the University of Arizona and got a law degree.